Ever wish you had someone to tell you the truth about what it takes to run a successful business and live a fulfilling life? Well, amiguita, you've come to the right place. So grab your favorite cafecito or cocktail, your courage, and let's get to work. I'm Jenna Borges, a therapist, business strategist, mindset coach for entrepreneurs, and a feisty Latina from Miami. And I'm determined to teach you the exact tools you need to stop settling and start kicking some serious derriere. What do you say? Are you in? Then let's get started. Welcome to Latinas Empowering Latinas podcast. Today, I want to introduce you to Gaby Rincon. She is a financial strategist and a personal finance coach with over 10 years in education. And she is the founder of RPF Education. Thank you so much, Gaby, for being here today. Please tell us about you and everything that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I kind of fell into this really authentically. So I started kind of getting educated on personal finance and how to effectively manage your money for my own finances. I have a lot of student loan debt. I had six figures at one point. I started really reading all of the books and listening to all of these podcasts. Initially, I kind of started posting on TikTok a few years ago, just as accountability for myself. And then I realized there is such a need for financial education, for financial literacy. And being in education, where I work with a lot of first gen students and a lot of low income people, I realized they were very, very hungry for this information. I mean, these 16-year-olds would be asking me, like, so what is a Roth IRA? Like, what does it mean to invest in all of these things? I was like, well, I really love empowering people. I love working with people who I identify with. And so I started RPF. It stands for Realistic Personal Finance Education. I describe myself kind of like a money coach. So I will coach you on how to do it yourself. And my joke is that the teacher in me always wants you to graduate. So I always want you to get to the point where you're like, thanks so much, Gabs. I can do this all on my own. I'm like, yay, that's perfect. Right now we offer one-on-one coaching, and we're having an asynchronous course, which is going to drop probably in the next few months, early 2024. I also offer like workshops, either in person. I have come to a few different high schools, college campuses, or workshops online, which is really cool. So if you want a more cohort style experience, that would be an option for you.
I love putting everything together, and I found you, and what drew
Mhm.
me to you, I think you had just started like your Instagram page, was that you said, and you had me at I help first gen and BIPOC community. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, that's me.
That
There's
is me.
somebody else on the other side who might get this. And the reason I think it connected me is because I'm going to term this, I don't know if it exists or not. And we just talked about it slightly before we got on officially. Something about money trauma, if there's such a thing. And I'll give some background for myself and why it really, like, I connected when you said that. So I come from a Cuban background. My grandparents came, they thought they were coming for 3 months and they were going back to their island. And 60 years later, they died here. The Cuban trauma, and I know every culture has a different trauma, is I'll explain a little bit, is there are things, and this is the trauma piece that's passed down that I
Mhm.
did not
Mhm.
know was part of their story.
Mhm.
So all Cubans have a safety deposit box.
Yep.
What's in there is usually things that we're scared are going to go away or be taken away. Whether you know or don't know, the history is that at one point, Cuban culture became communist. Everything was taken away
Mhm.
from them. Like actual cash was turned into like Cuban monopoly money.
Yep.
Their homes were no longer their own. Whatever they owned wasn't their own. They had nothing. Everything was stripped away from them. So what I saw growing up was my grandfather would work and he would
Yes.
come home with his paycheck and he would cash the check, come back with
Yes.
the cash, hide it in his house, God knows where. And then my aunt would do their billing, their checks, whatever, their bills on
Right.
Sunday and
Mhm.
every Sunday. And then she would total it up. And I remember her telling, okay, papi, tiene que depositar, like, this is how much I need to deposit into your account. I was like, what is this? So he would cash it, keep it at home. Then he would only deposit what had to be
What was
used to
actually
pay,
needed.
because not to save, but because he was so scared of banks.
Mhm. Mhm.
I kind of don't know where to go with this. I just know that there's a lot of things that we've been through. I know that, and again, and I'm guessing for a lot of first gen is our parents struggled really hard just to give us food and shelter.
Absolutely.
And it's not a negative on them. I think it's just part of the story. I was never taught to save.
Right.
And what I witnessed, so I have two different, and I'm sure that there's this whole kind of thing that you can go over with us. Like my mom was the spender
Uh-huh.
and my
Yes.
dad was the saver. My dad, there were a few times I remember, even young, and I'm sure, Gabby, we can go through this on money scripts, where I remember saying to my dad something I tell to myself all the time, like, I feel like I can't keep up. Like I spend, and as soon as I spend, the money's already gone. And
Yes.
even in like, my God, I was a teenager. I was a teenager. I was working in the summer. And I remember telling my dad one time, I feel like I can't keep up. Like I keep working and I still have, I think at that time, I mean, I would have loved to have that. The debt was like $1,000. And
Mhm.
he wrote me a check and he goes, don't tell your mom. He did it to pay off my debt. So
Yes.
that was his way of like, I don't want you to be in debt, but I was never
Mhm.
taught like, here, you should take a piece of your check and put it away because I think they didn't have that luxury. Like there was never anything to put away. So now my parents are in a place, thank God, and I don't know how, where their house is paid off. They have a property in Naples they bought cash.
Mhm.
Like, and my dad is
Wow.
really, really hardworking. And I mean, they were together from when my mom was 16 and he was 21. They grew up together. They had no
Together.
one to teach them. I have no idea how they've paid off their stuff. I mean, very diligently, obviously. They sent my brother and I to private school. And I know that that was a huge sacrifice because I remember
Of
my dad
course.
saying, like, I would have had power steering in a new car if it wasn't sending you to private school. And I'll never forget that.
Thanks, Dad.
I know, really, no pressure. But anyway, because I think that they didn't have the opportunity to save or they couldn't teach us how to save in that part too. And because of that, we have like all this messed up money stuff. So
Exactly.
take it on, Gabby. Talk
Yeah.
to me about
Oh,
like
all the
immigration and
things.
first
Yeah.
gen, everything.
I want to acknowledge the first gen piece first of all, because being a first generation American, first generation college student, whatever it ends up being, right?
Or first gen everything.
Exactly. Oftentimes they're first gen all of the things, including even high school. I have quite a few first gen students that are first generation
Mhm.
high school graduates, right? Like you mentioned, having that identity, that experience can be difficult to navigate because our parents are oftentimes working so hard to literally put food on the table, right? And so obviously what we grow up seeing is that it is normal to spend your entire income on living, on making sure that you pay the rent, on electric bills, on, food, et cetera, et cetera. And so once we become of age, we're working, presumably we have a slightly higher paying job, even though we have the room in our monthly budget to save, we've never seen that done. Not because of anyone's fault, but like you mentioned, like I love that you use the word luxury. It is a luxury to save for many people, right? And it's just not a reality that they have, especially this day and age with the cost of goods and inflation being so high, right? That's one of the big pieces that I want to acknowledge. The other thing is that a lot of the time for first gen people, they have additional familial responsibilities that come down to finances. Like, see how I just mentioned that our parents were very focused on the now, right? They didn't have the luxury to plan for the future. So what does it look like when they do want to retire? I know a lot of our parents want to work till forever, right? They're like, I'm just going to keep working. I'm 85. And it's like, as a daughter, a son, as a child of theirs, like we want to take care of them. And that's also a reality that we're probably going to have to at least subsidize a little bit of their retirement. Different context. With other non first gen people, that isn't quite as common. Then we talk about the money trauma that you're discussing. Obviously, if our parents left everything that they know, moved to an entire different country where they oftentimes didn't know the culture, didn't know the language, didn't have access to the financial system, right? So they're kind of shooting their shot, making it up as they go along, trying to survive. And a lot of that trauma that they experienced before is going to be passed down. I don't want to say that it makes sense, but it's understandable on why perhaps, your parents were also a little bit like, I don't want to have too many banks. Like, I'm going to trust the biggest name kind of thing. Right. And then that gets passed down to you and to you and to you. Right. The other thing about money trauma is we haven't even talked about like money trauma in terms of relationships, like controlling behavior, right? That I've seen where one partner might be in charge of everything and will only give the other partner X amount. And it's a way to kind of keep somebody in a dysfunctional, perhaps toxic, and even abusive relationship. And I've also seen that from parents to children. I've seen that especially in college students that, for example, I just had a student that she's in college now and she's at a great school, but parents don't support the fact that she is queer. And so they
Mm,
found out and they literally took money from her account, turned off her phone kind of thing. That is not only trauma, it's abuse. It's
it's
a form of
abusive.
financial abuse, right? It happens way more often than you'd think. It's something that I have to acknowledge as a money coach because if we don't acknowledge where your background is, how your psychology has come into play, then we can't ever build effective habits because personal finance, it really is just habit. And as you know, habit is all just psychology, right? Like, let's
Hmm.
start small, let's build from there. Sometimes it can get a little personal in money coaching. I'm not going to lie, right? Like, for example, I just had an appointment where it was a couple, and the husband stated that he struggles with overspending because if his kids say that they want something, he's like, okay, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you. And I was like, all right, like, tell me about money growing up. Like, what was that like? He's like, well, money was really tight and it was hard at times. And especially because for my family, I saw my parents working and they sent money back. They sent money to Mexico, right? And that happens a lot. And he's like, so I grew up, not necessarily having everything that I wanted and sometimes that I needed, but my parents were sending money away. And so that was a little hard for me, as that's how he's explaining it. And I asked him if there was a time that he remembers like really wanting something and it was just not possible. And he talked about this $2 toy. Then what I realized, like, one, your love language is gifts. You like to shower the people that you love with gifts, showing them things. And the second thing, and it's very, very common, is when we grow up in poverty, very low income, that we can, as we grow up, end up kind of going the other way and wanting to give our children, our families, everything that we didn't have. Right. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And this is what we talked about. I was like, that's great. I love that you love giving your kids gifts. I love that you want to give them everything that you didn't have. But what we need to do is just put in some parameters so that you can spend it guilt free, so that you don't feel overstressed like, oh, did I overspend on the baseball bat, whatever it was, that the kid wanted, and potentially put myself in a situation where I have to swipe a credit card to pay the electric bill or something like that. And that's oftentimes what money coaching leads to is like, let's work with you. Let's work with your psychology, not against you. And all we're going to start putting in is a little bit of guardrails so that we can start building that habit. The other thing that I notice all the time is like, especially with our community, they get into the point where they're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get all my money in order. And it's too much too soon. It's like 0 to 100. They're like, I'm never eating out ever again. And I'm going to save $250 a week when they've been saving literally nothing, right? It's the same as a yo-yo diet effect, right? So you're like really good at maybe
Gabby, I
really
was just
intense.
thinking about that. It's like you restrict and then you binge. You're like, I need to go out.
Exactly,
It's the same thing as a
exactly.
diet. It's a financial
It's
diet.
it is, and that's what you're doing, and it's the fad diet kind of thing, and the same thing happens with your finances. You'll be great for a week, maybe 2, and then boom, you just ate out or you just like swipe, 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 swipe. So the thing is that we have to start small. Like, what is the number that we can do? What are the habits that we can build that you can for sure guarantee that will happen? Even if it means let's transfer $20 a week. Because transferring $20 a week, guess what? You're going to have $80 at the end of the month. That's $80 more than you had ever had. And then next week, we'll build to 25 and you build it and build it and build it, right? And you're working again with the acknowledgement of what your background is coming from. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. So,
Okay.
insofar as like kind of money trauma, how do you change what you've learned? How do you make room to learn new skills? to like, if it is it so ingrained, because I'm thinking of like regular trauma. If something's so
Yeah,
ingrained in you, how do you break the cycle?
that's it's really difficult, right? And it's a lot of self-reflective work. Like, I don't think anyone realizes how much internal work you have to
Emotional.
do.
Mhm.
Exactly. Like, why, when I have a bad day, why do I feel like I have to go on a shopping spree? Like, what did we see growing up? What was that like? Probably the associations were like, when there was something bad going on or whatever, there was a little bit of extra money and we were able to spend it on candy, whatever it was, led to the
Self-soothing.
exactly the self-soothing behavior, the like kind of instant gratification. And now we're doing that on a bigger level, right? With trauma, and I feel like now I'm in your realm here, so, wanna acknowledge that. But, like, with trauma, I think one of the first things we have to do is, like, acknowledge that it's there and acknowledge what the triggers are. At least when I was in therapy extensively for my own trauma, like, my therapist would always talk to me about, like, "Your triggers are never necessarily going to go away." Like, your triggers are probably
How you
always
handle
going to
them.
trigger you. Exactly, but it's just, "Alright, you're triggered, now what?
Awareness.
What
Mhm.
happens now? How do we build better coping strategies? How do we get you to self-soothe in a way that's conducive to your overall health and not going to put you into a worse situation, you know? A lot of the stuff that I have clients do, both actually in workshops and in one-on-one, is a lot of like journaling, to be honest. Talk to me and I kind of give homework assignments. Maybe it's the teacher in me that's forever, but if we're really going to do this and you are really spending money on me to help you with learning how to manage your money so that you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck, then let's do it right. Let's really think about it. Like, so some of the things will be like, what was money like growing up? And they have to journal about it. What did you see in terms of saving? How does looking at your statement make you feel? And like, why are all of these things happening? Then we talk about it in coaching and we go from there. And so, like, how do we build that client, for example, that tends to overspend on stuff? We talked about anything else that he likes to do. Like, what else do you like to do? What else brings you joy? He's like, okay, well, I know it's kind of weird, but I really like to play pickleball. I was like, okay. So the next time you feel like you need to overspend instead, text me that you went to go play pickleball. And,
Mhm.
like, that's what it becomes. It becomes like I'm like their cheerleader, I'm like their little, like, accountability, like, guardrail. As you know, like, progress isn't linear, right? It
Mhm.
ends up and down, and the entire goal is forward motion, but sometimes it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. The point is that we're still moving that way, and I think that what really makes me effective is that I can make people feel very comfortable. I do disclose where I've coming from, like, or what I've noticed. And these are things that work for me. And what do you want to do? How do we build from there?
What would you say the biggest struggle overall that you've seen in the first gen population you've worked with that has this money trauma? What is the greatest like overlapping, overconnected over and over again you see?
Yes. If I had to put one thing, it would be that we are uncomfortable talking about money.
Mhm.
We're that we are taught that it is not polite,
But we're
right? That
taught
it is
not to talk about anything personal.
well, yeah, oh, I see. Yeah, absolutely.
Then you add money, right? Money's taboo. You don't talk about it. Mhm.
Money is incredibly taboo. We don't talk about money with our parents, with our siblings, like at all. It's super taboo, right? You don't ask people how much they make,
Oh my
how to read a
god, God
pay stub.
forbid.
No, exactly, right? You don't ask how they paid for anything. Like you're just going to assume that they're good. And so that by definition kind of like separates us, right? It kind of like segregates us when we can be a community and like support each other and help
Educating.
each other, right? Empowering each other. We're kind of trying to figure it out all on our own, maybe even drowning in debt and not feeling like we can even talk to our families about it. And for a lot of our Latinx community, like family is everything,
Everything.
right? And so can you imagine being in this situation where you're drowning, like you really need help, but you don't talk about it, like don't tell us, right? And so you're forced to kind of experience it alone. The other thing that I've noticed too, and I think it's kind of like a subset of that, is that a lot of our community is uncomfortable, not even like asking for help, but accepting help in that situation where maybe we do find out, like, okay, esta tía necesita ayuda, this tía, like, she needs some help, like, let's maybe support in kind of a way, and you offer it, and then she's uncomfortable, like, "No, no, no, I can't." Because we have this implied idea that if somebody gives you something, that you're gonna owe them something in return, right? This is really interesting because there's a difference, there's a correlation between socioeconomic status as well. Like, wealthier people, I've noticed, feel more comfortable asking receiving a loan than lower income people. That's something that we talk about a lot, is like, why do you feel this way? And why do you think that if your mom gives you a loan, your dad gives you a loan, whoever it is, right? Are they really going to be upset with you if you perhaps miss a payment, or instead of paying them the next month, you just communicate and you pay them a little bit later, right? Like, the whole thing is that we are a community and we can work together. And to be honest, I think that this day and age, by collaborating and being more communal, I think that's the only way we can really make it. We have to support each other because so many of us are struggling. So many families are really struggling.
I'm gonna jump on what you're saying now, and I'm gonna take it to a
Mhm.
different level. So you
Yeah.
said we don't talk about it because we don't talk about money.
Mhm.
And because of that, we lose sense of community and sense of being to
Mhm.
support one another. And I remember being younger and again, not knowing things. So I was in high school. I went to, again, my parents sacrificed. So the opposite of my family
Yeah.
was I went to a high school where the entire parking lot, as soon as you got your license, was filled up brand new off the lot, like Mercedes and Porsches. And I was like, my mom was picking me up in her like 20-year-old car that made all these kinds of sounds. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God. But I was invited to go out on weekends. And I remember my dad saying, "You have to pick one." And I used to be so mad at him, like, "I'm getting
Yeah.
invited to all these things and I can only go to one, like, that's so unfair, like, I have good grades and I'm a good girl and I
Yeah.
help at home," and I was so upset, and it wasn't until after college, then I don't know
Mhm.
what conversation it was, where he finally said, "We didn't have the money to give you to go to those things."
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, "Every time you went out, it was $20, and if you were invited 3 times in a weekend, I didn't have
That's
that to give you."
$60. Right.
But I would have preferred, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I would have preferred to have known. I'm very transparent. I have this conversation on different angles with parents about kids. Like, my kids ask me
Mhm.
a question, they're gonna get an answer. The dorks didn't bring babies, you know,
Right.
gender stuff, like, sometimes boys marry boys and sometimes girls marry girls, and that's
Yeah.
and you know what the answer is in my house? "Okay," because I
Yeah.
answer the question age appropriately, and I
Mhm.
don't tiptoe around it, and I'm not gonna make it something that's not. But I'm very transparent with my kids when they're like I'm sure the generation after 1st gen is like a whole other ballgame, like this client you're
Mhm.
talking about, where, like, my kids' closets and their rooms are so full that it's embarrassing. But then there's probably another 1st gen trauma where it's like, I don't wanna take anything away from them.
Yeah.
So it's like
Exactly.
it's overhauled. Like,
Mhm.
we have, like, construction bags full of toys that I want to give to somebody who needs them, and I think that's the only rationale, but I feel bad taking them away from my kids. It's super weird.
That's
But when
interesting.
things come up and I just say, "That's a lot of money.
Mhm.
I'm saving for Disney. I'd rather make it at home. I'd rather save that money. We don't need to spend money on that." It's this balance of not trying to make it too much about money, but educating them, like, I'd rather do that than not have them
Keeping them in the
understand.
dark.
Of
Yeah.
course, because I felt like that didn't help me. Again, I'm hoping I don't provide, like, any, like, money anxiety scripts to them, but I'm trying to, like,
Right.
educate, like, money, there's no money tricks,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
And
like
if we can't do that, it's because I'm saving for something else or, like, I'm
mhm.
sending you to this really great school, and those are kind of the but those conversations never happened. And had they
Right.
happened, I probably wouldn't have had such a strange relationship for so long because I thought my parents were being mean because I couldn't go out, couldn't afford to send me.
Exactly, exactly, and then what does that look like to be transparent with your children about money? I think it's interesting that you have, like, kinda 2 experiences, and I'm kinda thinking about all of my school community. I mean, at this point, I've been in education for 10 years, like, I've dealt with hundreds of kids, right? You either have the kid who knows literally everything and, in terms of their finances, like, "Okay, my mom gets paid on Friday, my dad gets paid on the following Friday, this is how much," like, and I'm coming at it from the context of, like, I'm their band teacher or something, right? And they have to buy their shoes or something like that, right? I'm like, "Okay, the shoes are gonna be, like, $35." And they're like, "Okay, well, so but then the rent is due on the 1st, but then the electric bill is due here, so miss, is it okay if I give you $5 here, and then $10 here, and then $20 here," kinda thing, right? Or you get completely in the dark. You just the kid just doesn't know anything about what's going on. And I think that can be a little problematic for them afterwards, right? Because then if they're in the dark, then they're in the dark. And then all of a sudden they're 18. You can take out a credit card when you're 18. I mean, you can take out a loan. Like, don't get me started on student loans and the chaos of like, how do we just let people, these 18-year-olds, take out like 50K in 1 year, you know? And so I agree. Like, I think in an age appropriate way, there is
Somewhere in the middle.
exactly, right? Like for example, I don't know, if your child is 10 years old or something like that, maybe, they do a couple chores, whatever, they make their bed or something, they do the dishes, they get a little allowance. Now, I'm not saying it has to be a lot of money. It could be like $10. And how cool would it be if it's all in ones kind of thing so that they can decide like, all right, where how much of these $1 bills should we put into your piggy bank? And they get to choose, right? And you're just kind of like watching. Well, what am I using the piggy bank for? Well, didn't you say that you really want to go to, or, whatever it is you wanted to go watch that movie? So you're going to need about like $20 to go to that movie. So let's save up for it. Okay. So I'm going to put $2 into that piggy bank. Okay. And what do you want to do with the rest of it? What should we do? I'm going to put it in my wallet. And then when we go to the store, I'll buy a snack. Okay. Like in an age appropriate way,
You're
you're
having the
teaching them
conversation.
about saving. You're teaching them about like goods that experiences cost money, right? And they're also getting that kind of experience of like, if I do work, then I get money and I get money to go have fun and
Mhm.
do all of the things that I want to and need to do. Not saying that we should like implement hustle culture or anything like
No,
that,
no,
but
no.
right?
I think there's also the emotional piece. So like we go to Disney a lot, and what I've
Mhm.
been trying to do to get less toys in our house is I say, just for like Christmas and stuff, our birthdays, give us Disney gift cards.
Yeah.
So when we go, they always want something. I'm like, okay, are you going to use your card? You're going to use your money, right? And then suddenly I see a slowdown, and it's like, do they really want it or not?
Yeah.
Because yeah, because suddenly it's like, well, you're not buying it for me. I have to
Mhm.
spend my gift card. No. Then suddenly there's a little bit of like decision making too. And I have
Exactly.
them swipe when it's ready, when they want, and it's
Mhm.
their money and it's tagged differently. But again, it's just a little bit of exposure about money and how it works without like being
Exactly.
super, I think is so critical. Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's wrap up on this section,
Okay.
but one more question. What are some baby steps that first gens can take when they feel like they want to start
Mhm.
looking at their finances, but they've never had any exposure to it? Some
Yeah.
baby steps.
The baby step that I always say is like, just go to the library and check out a book. Like, it's free. You don't have to put anything in there, or listen to a podcast, or follow a personal finance creator that you actually like can vibe with. Watch a couple videos. Like, just start getting exposed to the idea of talking about money and to listen about money and being comfortable with like, I wonder, do I use a credit card? Like, oh, do I overswipe? Like being comfortable starting to just have that conversation with yourself.
I love
And
that.
that is huge. Like, just let's start
Awareness.
getting you exactly. Let's start getting you comfortable just learning about these things. Because if we can't learn about them, then we can't implement them. And if we can't implement them, then there's kind of no point, right? We're just going to be doing the
Mhm.
same thing over and over and over again.
And Gabby, so I'm a huge fan of Gabby's. I'm actually working with her. I found her. I'm huge. So, Gabby, how can people work with you? How can they follow to start getting exposed to
Yeah.
more information from you, even if they're not ready to like work on it, but just the exposure of it?
We post a lot on TikTok. So TikTok, RPF Education, Instagram, same thing, RPF Education. We also have a website. You can look at our Google reviews. Honestly, like I say this all the time. I say this to like people in the community. Like, once you're ready, comment a question. I'll answer it. Like, I will create an entire different video just answering your question, right? Because I just want to positively reinforce that you shot your shot and you asked somebody in a public way a question about like money, because that is pretty vulnerable. And I want to encourage that because I think that's really cool. People also DM us. Like, I think a lot of clients just DM on Instagram or DM on, on TikTok because I have my messages open. And they're like, "So if I wanted to work with you, what would that happen? Well, how would that be?" And of course, it's on our website, but like at the end of the day, if people are shooting their shot and they're contacting me, I'm going to respond. And I'm fortunate that I have an assistant who also helps me with filtering some of that stuff, and she can support me with that. The one-on-one coaching, I know it's a little bit more expensive than people might expect, but it really is an investment because I cater everything to you and to what you need. And
Okay, I'm gonna jump in, Gabby.
yeah, sure.
Um, Gabby's pricing is very, very, very reasonable, especially for someone who's starting off. So it's not a lot at all. I think it's definitely something that Gabby's taken into consideration where we all are if
Mhm.
we need to start on this. So I'm going to dispute you and say it is exceptionally reasonable. And if needed, there are alternate ways of working with Gabby. But
Yeah.
I definitely think it's worth the investment to get your money stuff in order.
Exactly. I just mean that it is obviously more expensive working one-on-one than like if you signed up for a workshop, for
Mhm.
example, or a asynchronous course. But again, that one-on-one, that individualized, customized help, I think it makes a really big impact. And if we're really gonna do it, then let's do it. Like
Mhm.
we need a little bit of maybe push, like a little skin in the game, if I may. Like I did April and May. I wanted to try to reach as many people as possible. And so I offered pro bono coaching. And something that I noticed, right? It was completely free, free of charge. It was totally pro bono, right? And something that I noticed was that the clients who actually paid ended up following through more than my pro bono clients. And not to say that nobody who did pro bono like followed through. If you looked at the
There's a
percentage, it's
different weight to it.
exactly because like, okay, I'm investing in this. Like I'm putting money in this. And it really is an investment because your return is going to be you're not living paycheck to paycheck anymore. You know what to do. So
All right.
yeah,
And then we're
but
also going to be sharing everything on our website. So if you go to
mhm,
janessaborges.com/43 for episode 43, we will have Gabby's information on there. Thank you so much, Gabby, for joining us today.
of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always such an honor to speak to you. If you loved today's episode, I would love and be so grateful if you left a review. So let me know what was your greatest takeaway, any aha moments, and how you were inspired. I'd love to give you a shout out in a future episode. Until next time, Maminita.